Okay, this question asks us if the samples are dependent or independent. Okay, and that goes back to that idea of independence that we started at the beginning of the course. Does the sampling of one number impact the sampling of another number? If it does, then that means they're dependent. If it doesn't, that means they're independent. So, like, if I ask a person, like, who are you going to vote for? And if they say Canada Day, and I punch them in the stomach, and then ask the next person who they're going to vote for, the results are going to probably depend on what that other person said, right? So, obviously, a silly example, but let's read through this and we can figure out whether the samples are independent, dependent. Maybe we've got to choose an explanation why. Librarian like to determine whether a new book appeals to more adults or to children. Librarian asks 10 randomly selected adults and their children whether or not they will be interested in reading books. The librarian then sorts the responses into two samples, one of the adults' answers, one of their children's answer. Are the samples independent? You're not taking a child from one parent and comparing it to a different parent, right? So, in other words, like you got a pair, this is parent A, he or she is paired up with child A, and they compare the results, okay? So that means parent A depends on child A. They have to go together. You wouldn't put child B and compare them because they come from two different families. So we've got to say that they are dependent. You know, the parent and the child, they get sampled together. They don't get mixed up into two separate groups. To make the samples independent, the library should take a random sample of adults and then separately take a random sample of children who are not related to those adults. That would help, okay? Because then it really depends on what you're trying to study. Maybe you do want to do a dependent sample study to see if parent and children have related tastes in books. But if we're trying to do an independent study, the children, the parents shouldn't be related to each other. They shouldn't be dependent on one another. Okay, so let's see this one. That's correct that the samples are dependent. To make the samples independent, a larger sample of adults, and a larger sample isn't going to change anything, whether something's dependent or independent. To make the samples independent, the library should make sure to ask about the book over multiple days. Maybe that affects the results, but if you're just changing, the days that you ask them on, that doesn't change whether they're dependent or independent. You still have a parent and child going together.